flask of anthrax was the genetic parent of the 2001 anthrax attacks, according to the Justice Department and the FBI, which today released evidence against a dead man who was never even charged, let alone tried or convicted, and declaring that evidence conclusive. In our fourth story on the countdown, the government declares Dr. Bruce Ivins as the only person responsible for those anthrax attacks, despite an admitted lack of any direct evidence. Hundreds of pages of documents, including 14 search warrants, released today. U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Taylor concluding that the anthrax responsible for the attacks late in 2001 matched a single flask of spores codenamed RMR 1029. That flask allegedly created and solely maintained by Dr. Ivins. Investigators conceding that over 100 others may have had access to the substance, but they were methodically eliminated as suspects. The officials' other prime assertions include a machine used to dry pathogens used by Dr. Ivins at the Fort Detrick, Maryland facility, inordinate and unexplained hours Dr. Ivins worked during the relevant time period, envelopes used in the attacks having certain defects matching envelopes available at a post office that Dr. Ivins frequented, the anthrax letters posted in Princeton, New Jersey, near the office of a sorority with which Dr. Ivins was allegedly obsessed. Also, Ivins' poor mental health as apparent motive, Dr. Ivins' distress that his anthrax vaccination program might be coming to an end, and Dr. Ivins' proclivity for writing Congress and the media dozens of letters. Of course, those did not contain any anthrax.
What direct evidence do you have? For instance, do you have any tape that was used on the envelope that was recovered from his home? Do you have any other evidence that clearly would link him? For instance, in the affidavit, it mentions that people of this sort often keep souvenirs. Did you find anything like that at his home?
So we have a flask that's effectively the murder weapon from which those spores were taken that was controlled by Dr. Ivins. The anthrax in that flask was created by Dr. Ivins. We have the suspicious behavior that he had undertaken over the years. We have, in addition, the mail envelopes with the tool stamp defects I had mentioned.
A memorial service was held today for Dr. Ivins at Fort Detrick, and Dr. Ivins' attorney, in a statement, reasserted his client's innocence. Let's call in once again investigative author Gerald Posner, who wrote Why America Slept, the Failure to Prevent 9/11. Thanks again for your time tonight, sir.
Thanks, Keith. Good to be with you again.
The flask of anthrax with identical spores, ostensibly their strongest piece of evidence. What do you make of it?
That's what they make it sound like, but it's not. Let me tell you, the lay public hears this, they think that's the evidence. Those are the spores that got people sick sent off in the envelopes. Not true. That was liquid anthrax in that flask. Even if the FBI can tie it to that flask, they can't explain how it was then made into this extremely sophisticated type of weapon with small milligrammage, with electric charges to it, with polyglass on top of the coating, all to go deep inside the lungs to spray into the air. This was weaponized military anthrax. They cannot explain how it went from that glass flask in a liquid form into the form that was sent out in the envelopes. That they don't have the evidence on.
What, if anything, that they presented today is the strongest evidence? What have they got going for them?
Well, they throw out this machine, what they call the lyophilizer. They say that can make wet anthrax and a dry anthrax, but I talked to 6 different microbiologists today and people involved formerly in weapons programs in the United States and in Russia who say that the machine that the FBI talks about can't do that. The strongest evidence they have going for them is also their Achilles heel, and that's his psychological profile. The fact that he's very unstable, that he was someone who was an alcoholic, that he might have wanted to have the vaccine continue to go along, but that's also the fact that he could have been set up as a cutout, a patsy, or used by a group of people who wanted the anthrax out there. They also knew about his weak psychological profile. How was he employed with the most secret biological warfare lab in the United States with this type of background that we now hear about, that they should have known about from day one? The Defense Department should hang its head in shame.
Right. 35 years of murderous intent and nobody knew about it, and they let him into the germ warfare lab. As to motive, they mentioned it, but almost as if it were in passing. Is that a weak part of the case? Did they offer anything that made any sense?
Boy, I'll tell you, I thought it was a weak part of the case. I listened to the press conference today, and then sort of at the end, as though they thought they had to throw something out, they said, oh, by the way, let's give you a reason as to why we think he sent out and went on this homicidal rage. And the motive, they said, was, well, he'd helped develop a vaccine for anthrax. He probably wanted to continue to see that develop, so by that killing people, by having come up with some unknown way of this high military-grade anthrax, we would keep the vaccine program going. That was pretty weak. And, you know, I thought they just literally were fishing. They don't don't have a good motive, unfortunately for them in their prosecution. But as you said in the lead into this, they don't need to, because the primary suspect, the only suspect, is dead. They're going to close this case.
But the declaration that he is the only, it's not just a question of proving a dead man did this or was part of this, but the insistence is he did it by himself, the lone mad scientist thing. Did they get anywhere near confirming that?
No. As a matter of fact, Keith, that's my major problem with this. You know, if you look at it and you say he's involved, he's got a role in it, he's done something, the evidence, I'm waiting to see that, and they may nail that down. But I spoke to enough experts in the last few days who have convinced me, who know how this process works, that these spores that were sent out were not the work of one lone scientist, and that, I believe, is the case.
Investigative journalist and author Gerald Posner, your help on this has been invaluable. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Keith.